Hi and welcome to this video. Today I'm not actually sharing an update on one of my languages, but I'm going to talk a little bit about language updates as a video genre. There is such a huge variety of language update videos out there, and I love watching them, but I think we as language learning community have not reached our full potential with these videos yet. Of course, language update videos can be great to track your own progress, but I think they could be really valuable for other learners as well. Unfortunately, a lot of the videos out there are just either very dry, slapping random stats in your face without providing much context, or they're very vague and you don't really know where a learner is at when they're trying to explain what their learning currently looks like or their progress has been like, or they're just very long and rambly, making it hard to watch the whole video and actually getting any information out of the learner. Especially people in the immersion learning community have a very specific style of language update videos, because usually when people ask to show like your progress, you're expected to speak, but as immersion learners tend to push their speaking or their output in general back a little bit in their journey, they're sometimes left just talking about what they have done to try to explain what their progress is like. But it doesn't have to be that way, because there are ways that even people from the immersion learning community can show what their progress and their current understanding is like. In this video, I want to provide a rough outline for what language update videos could look like for them to be more informative to other learners, as well as generally more engaging to watch. I'm going to include some guiding questions that you can try to answer in each section of the video, as well as provide some activities that you could include to show what your current language ability looks like, even as an immersion learner. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with super long, rambly videos or just pure stats, but I think that language update videos have a great potential to be good for other learners. And I would love to see a kind of change in the way we approach trying to share our progress. Without further ado, let me walk you through the outline of the video. Like any good essay, your video should include an introduction, a main part, and a conclusion or closing thoughts. First, you start off with a self-introduction. Who are you and what are you doing in your video? What language are you learning and what update step is this? Is this a 1-month update? Is this a 1-year update? Have you been learning for 5 years maybe? In this section, you'll want to share a few information about the language that you're learning and how you're learning that language. Some questions you could try to answer are, how long have you been learning your language for? And yes, this includes the 5 years of Spanish high school classes, even though you might think you didn't learn anything, but those 5 years are valuable information for your viewers and other learners to know. There are a lot of videos out there saying they learned a language to fluency in 2 years, even though they have had a background of 10 years of high school classes, and I think not mentioning that kind of hides part of the truth. Other questions could be, why are you learning the language? What other languages do you speak or are you currently learning? And what's your native language? What is your primary method of learning? Are you attending college classes? Are you a self-learner? Is your learning immersion-based? Do you live in the target country? What textbook do you use for your primary learning? And last, what is your general mood about your current learning? Do you feel like you're making a lot of progress? Have you maybe lost motivation? Were you really busy this month? Have you made any great breakthroughs? Just briefly mention how you're feeling. This section is basically just to give us as viewers a little feeling for what kind of person you are and what your connection to the language is. As a next step, share some of your past goals that you've set for yourself. Maybe there was a certain amount of books that you wanted to read until now. Maybe you wanted to go through a certain amount of textbook chapters. Maybe you wanted to watch a certain amount of hours of TV. Or you just set a goal of wanting to take italki lessons and starting to talk to a tutor. Just share that with us. So now that we know who you are and what your goals were, it's time to share some stats, because now we do have some context about what you wanted to achieve and what your current learning looks like, so that we can put those stats into context. If your video covers a really long period of time, so maybe 6 months or more, I think it would be a good idea to give a timeline of what you did at what stage of your learning. If your video only covers like, let's say, a month of studying, then I don't think a timeline is very necessary as not much time has passed. And then give us some stats. How many textbook chapters did you actually end up going through? How many hours of immersion did you actually end up getting to? How many italki lessons did you take? And so on and so forth. Anything that you can put a number on and want to share with us, do it. And then remember to relate this back to your goals. Did you meet your goals? Did you maybe get close to some? Did you replace some goals that you originally set, but then replace it with another activity? Just give us a little more context for your goals and your stats. Also, just a quick tip, this part of your update video might be a little dry, so having some kind of visual aid like graphs or pictures can really make the viewing experience a lot better. Especially graphs are really great to get a really quick overview in just one glance so that you don't need to do all the math in your head. Okay, and this is where the really fun part starts, because now that we have past things that you have done and goals that you've set, the stats that we gave us, they're still all very vague and it's kind of hard to imagine what your current ability then looks like. So me and my boyfriend, we came up with 4 activities that you could potentially include in your language update videos to share what your current ability in your language is like. And this is not only speaking. The 4 things that we think you could include are a comprehension test, a transcription, obviously speaking, and a language test. Most of these are pretty obvious, but let me just quickly go over what each of these actually mean and what they're good for. The comprehension test is a great way to show your language abilities, especially as an immersion learner. Basically, what you do is you take a piece of written media that can be anything, manga, subtitles, a novel, a news article, whatever you want to read. You read through it either out loud or silently. I know a lot of people are uncomfortable with reading out loud, but I think that especially is a good activity to do just to show what your current pronunciation looks like. And as you read through your piece of media, you kind of go and explain what is happening in the text, but also in your head. Some aspects that you could focus on that would be especially interesting are obviously words that you don't know, phrases or idioms that you don't know, grammar structures that you're unfamiliar with, and maybe a word choice you don't understand. For character-based languages like Japanese, Mandarin, and Cantonese, it might be interesting to also go over the characters that you might know but don't know their reading, or you don't know the meaning but you do know their reading, just to, give a kind of analysis of what's going on in the text as you read through it. And then when you're done going through the text line by line or paragraph by paragraph, you just kind of give a summary of what happened in the text. For intermediate or advanced learners, it could even be interesting to compare 2 types of media, one thing that you know really well and one thing that's unfamiliar to you, such as, for example, you could compare young adult novels to a Wikipedia article about a topic that you don't know much about. We think that this activity is a way better way of showing what your comprehension looks like, rather than saying, I understand some of this book, or I didn't know some words in this article. This gives the viewer, other learners, a very precise way of looking at your abilities. Okay, then let's move on to the second activity that you could include, which is a transcript. So a transcript is essentially you take a piece of audio and you transcribe what you're hearing. It is kind of like the comprehension test, just for audio. And so basically the same guiding questions apply. Which words could you not understand properly? Which words did you not know? Which constructions did you struggle with? Or what idioms have you not heard before? Obviously, depending on the type of media, things like slang, different accents, or dialects could also play into your comprehension. So you might also want to explain how that was for you. For anyone that's not familiar with transcribing, I would suggest that you take a 3 to 5 minute clip and transcribe that, depending on your level, obviously. But anything more than that, and it's going to take quite a long while to get the transcript done. On to the next part, which is speaking. I think everyone is pretty familiar with this, as it is currently the #1 used way to show people's ability. And I do think that speaking is a great way to show others where you're currently at in your learning. Speaking engages a lot of different areas in your brain and requires different skills than just understanding things. So it might be a little trickier to do that, especially when you don't have a conversation partner to talk to, but it's literally just you talking yourself. I think it's still really valuable even if you don't plan on sharing audio clips of your recorded self with other people, to just record yourself speaking or reading out loud. It is so encouraging to go back to older recordings and listen to yourself talk, and you just start noticing all these things that were so wrong with your speaking and how far you've come in your language learning journey. Obviously, in language update videos, you can talk as much or as little as you like. You can just introduce yourself, talk about your day, or you can have a full discussion about a topic of your choice. Moving on to the last activity that you can include in your videos to show your language ability is taking a language test. And I'm not saying you have to pay hundreds of dollars to take a language test. There are free versions of, or test versions of, a lot of the official tests out there on the internet. Language tests are obviously very limited in what they can test and the way they can test, but I still think they are great for testing your grammar and vocab knowledge and how much meta-knowledge you have of these fields. So instead of taking the test and just throwing a final score at us, I think it would be more interesting to go over the test and the areas that you might have struggled with, or how you try to solve different problems. If there's multiple choice, maybe explain why you chose one answer over the other and just try to go over it, explaining what's going on in your head. Okay, so these were the 4 activities that you could include in your language update video to show your language ability. That is the comprehension test, the transcription, speaking, and taking a language test. Now let's move on to the next step, a little self-reflection. So up to this point, what we've done is we've gotten to know you, we've gotten to know your goals, and we've got a lot of stats and how those relate to your goals. We also got to know what your current ability looks like. So up until this point, everything has been really factual and there haven't been a lot of feelings and emotions involved. But now let's actually talk about those for a second. Some guiding questions that you could try to answer in this part are: how did you feel during the month? Or whatever time frame you're covering with your video. How do you feel about the progress that you're making? Do you feel like you're progressing? Do you feel like you're stuck? What does your motivation level currently look like? Are you still all hyped to get good? Or has that motivation kind of faded away? Did something re-spark your motivation recently? Was there something that was really hard for you this month? Or something that really made you struggle? This could be language related, but this could also be life circumstances. Did you try something new this month? Maybe a new method or a new technique for studying? Did it work out? Did it totally fail? So in this part, share any personal opinions, feelings, thoughts that you have about your learning, both the good and the bad. If you can, also try to relate this back to your goals. Maybe failing your goal was really disappointing and it made you lose your motivation. Or maybe you failed it and that encouraged you to try even harder. If you want to, also take a second to reflect on the ability tests that you did for this video. Were you really surprised about how much you could understand? Was the transcript really hard for you because of a certain dialect? Maybe your grammar knowledge is not as good as you actually thought it was, and now you want to brush up on your grammar. And while we're at it, also share some of the methodology that you really liked or that you really disliked. Maybe a new technique that you tried out, maybe an app that you used differently, or something that you found super motivating. Maybe a technique that a lot of other people use didn't quite fit well with your learning style and you want to share that with the people. Also, with all of these questions, don't forget to add why you think that is, so that other learners that have a similar or completely different learning style to yours can relate that back to themselves. And then lastly, maybe you want to do the same for content. Maybe you found a manga that you really loved and you wish more people would read it with you. Or maybe you started watching a show but you really didn't like it, so you just dropped it. Maybe you started reading a book, but it was just way too hard for you and you're gonna attempt to read it again in half a year. I think it would be great if we as learning community could share these kind of things with each other so that we can kind of build a library of content that might be too hard or too easy at certain stages of our learning. Okay, so we've talked about the past, we've talked about your current ability, your current feelings and thoughts, and now it's time to look a little bit into the future. So lastly, feel free to share what kind of goals you set for yourself for the next period of time. What activities do you plan on doing next? Are you maybe going to change your routine a little bit? What is the next big milestone that you're trying to hit? And that concludes the language update video. Just to summarize, you introduce yourself, talk about you and your language, what relation do you have to that language, and what are you currently doing. Talk a little bit about your past goals and connect that with the stats. Then give us a little taste of your ability with the 4 activities that you can include in your video. After that, reflect a little bit. How is your learning going? How do you currently feel about your learning? What do you think about your progress? Don't forget to mention the methodology and content that you really liked and disliked. And as a last step, share your future goals. I know this was a lot, but again, you can implement as little or as much from this video as you think is beneficial for your video. If you want to follow this exact outline, that is perfectly fine too, but again, no pressure. I'll have my 1-month Korean update video out either next week or the week after that, where you can see me apply this outline to a real video. If you want to see that, consider subscribing, and as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.